If you've followed my content for the past 2 years or so, you should know that I am a huge fan of animation. The stuff from Ghibli, DreamWorks, Kyoto Animation, Disney, Pixar, Sony these days, and so many other studios are amongst some of my favorite pieces of fiction ever. However, I am not blind to the slip-up scene within the medium, and slip-ups seem to be pretty common within one certain studio: Illumination. I don't like them. Not to the point where I get offended by people making memes out of their movies, but they still rub me the wrong way. Their movies are some of the most bland and uninteresting products out there, yet they still rake in mountains of dough. How is that? With their take on one of my all-time favorite franchises on the horizon, I thought it would be a good idea to look into this studio's catalog and figure out what really pisses me off about them. Let's start at the very beginning. Founded in 2007 by Fox Animation's former president, Chris Meledandri, Illumination would go on to release their first film, Despicable Me, in July of 2010. I saw this movie in theaters, on opening day actually. I loved it as a little kid, and even as a young adult, I still really like it. It's not amazing, but it still has its heart in the right place. Gru is a really charming protagonist, and his journey towards fatherhood and away from villainy is genuinely heartwarming. The other characters are quite likable as well. Vector is a solid villain, and it can be pretty damn funny at times. Of course, I can't talk about Despicable Me without talking about the Minions. They're actually quite a bit of fun in this movie, and outside of maybe one scene, they don't overstay their welcome, at least within the movie. I say that because the Minions dominated the marketing, attracting kids with their simple designs and loud voices. You could argue that the Minions made more of a cultural impact than the actual movie, which totally won't be important for later. Despicable Me went on to make over $500 million in the box office off a budget of only $69 million. Nice. And it was also a hit with critics and audiences. It may not be the best animated villain redemption story of 2010, but it's still pretty good. For a studio with such a poor reputation, they sure got off to a good start. That can only identify a good future, right? A year later, in 2011, Illumination gave us Hop, a live-action animation hybrid that is so terrible I don't even feel like talking about it. Good thing too, because it isn't important to the video in the slightest. I feel like even Illumination themselves want to forget this thing ever happened, not that I blame them. Let's fast forward to 2012, when Illumination's problems really began. That was the year they released The Lorax, a adaptation of the Dr. Seuss book, and one which completely misses the point of the original book. Seriously, this is supposed to be a story about how we're supposed to protect the environment, and they use the titular force of nature to promote a gas car, the kind that the atmosphere. I would say more about how hard this movie pisses on the source material, but I haven't got all day. Just watch Dumbzill's video on it. Even looking past that, Illumination's Lorax is just a terrible movie in general. None of the characters are compelling or likable, the humor is annoying, the songs are bland, the villain sucks. You get it? This movie's like a forest fire. It has one decent song, and Danny DeVito also does a good job as the Lorax. Not to mention, there's also some ironic value thanks to the memes this movie spawned, but it has nothing going for it otherwise. Seriously, how did this make $350 million? Before we move on, I just want to bring up Bigger Ring, an absolutely fire rock ballad about the One Star's rise, which was cut and replaced with How Bad Can I Be, likely because it was too dark? Really? The Lorax is a dark story. It has to be dark in order to properly get its message across. Do you really think kids are too fragile to handle stuff like this? Have you seen any Disney movie from the 90s? Facing fears is how people grow. It's how they improve. They need to learn about the destruction caused by greed, and if it leaves them shivering in fear, so be it. Time to move on to 2013, when Illumination, surprise surprise, gave Despicable Me a sequel. It's also pretty good. Not as good as the first, but still enjoyable. Gru is still great, he has solid chemistry with Lucy, El Macho's a step up from Vector in the villain department, and it's pretty funny as well. However, it has a fairly standard plot, which, while enjoyable, doesn't really bring anything fresh or impactful to the franchise. It's still a good movie, but it kind of feels like it was only made because the first movie did so well. As a matter of fact, Despicable Me 2 ended up performing way better in the box office, grossing nearly $1 billion. It also went on to be Illumination's first and currently only Oscar nomination for Best Animated Feature. It lost to Frozen, but it's still an impressive feat for them. However, even though the movie was good and well received, the marketing was inescapable. Back in 2013, you could not walk 2 steps without being informed of this movie's existence. Advertising and promotional material was everywhere, and 8-year-old me couldn't stand it. Seriously, my school did a Christmas play themed around Despicable Me. I get it. This is a big franchise. You don't need to shove it in my face every second of the day. Anyway, the marketing was a bit much, but at least the movie was still good. I sure hope Illumination still prioritizes quality filmmaking after this. 2015 was the year the Minions took over. They got their own movie, a spin-off from the main Despicable Me franchise, and along with it came a huge wave of merchandising. Remember how hard Illumination pushed the marketing for the first two DMs? This movie's marketing makes them look tame in comparison. Promotion for Minions was everywhere, and no matter where you went, you just couldn't escape it. Naturally, a lot of people became fed up with the Minions. And honestly, who wouldn't after having to see these yellow Tic Tacs 100 times a day? I mean, they're not even the main characters of their own franchise. Now that I'm mostly done rambling about the marketing, how's the actual movie? It's in my bottom 5. How the did we, as a species, let this happen? This is one of the most blatant examples of a film shelled out just for a quick buck. As a prequel, it has no regard for the continuity of Despicable Me, and it adds nothing to the lore. It can't go 2 seconds without completely shifting the direction of the story. 80% of the movie is filler nonsense. The Minions themselves have no personality or development, and the other characters are not much better. Any and all attempts at emotional moments fall flat on their face. It's less of a movie and more of a montage of silly Minion moments. If the movie's basically just that, all it would need to do to work is to be funny. Is it funny? No. The whole shtick of the Minions acting like loud idiots gets old very quickly, and the rest is all just the most mundane attempts at humor imaginable. You get it? This movie has nothing to say. Nothing going for it. And do you want to know how much it made? Over $1 billion. This is when the realization finally struck Illumination. They don't have to try to make good movies. They could just mindlessly cobble together a hollow product and the end result wouldn't matter, because as long as they go overboard with the marketing and cast the biggest celebs out there, it would still make bank. This has been the status quo of the studio for years. None of their movies since then have been worth watching, yet all of them made big bucks in the box office. As much as I don't want to talk about movies I don't care even the slightest bit about, I have to bring them up somehow, so I guess I'll just blaze through them all. The Secret Life of Pets. Boring, contrived, derivative, and predictable. Everything this movie attempts to do is done way better in the Toy Story movies. Sing. There are way too many characters of vastly different roots, as if the movie attempts to please every demographic out there. They're already bland and predictable on their own, but putting them all together clutters the runtime, and the movie feels like it goes nowhere as a result. It also heavily relies on pop music over quality writing, as if it banks on the audience going, "Hey, I know that song," over getting invested in the story and characters. Despicable Me 3 had potential to explore Gru's thoughts on returning to villainy, but it does nothing with it and just resorts to meandering for an hour and a half. At least Trey Parker was funny. The Grinch misunderstands and dumbs down the original story. It's not even funny bad like the Ron Howard one. It's just bland and boring. The Secret Life of Pets 2. 3 bad, unrelated TV episodes lazily stitched together. Proves that Illumination would probably be better off making TV shows and short films rather than theatrical movies. Sing 2. A slight step up from the first because it actually kinda lets its characters be characters rather than self-inserts for the audience, but it's still a really boring and unengaging retread of the first movie. It's once again bloated and reliant on pop songs, and any and all conflict is resolved in the most contrived, hollow ways imaginable. It's also by far the worst offender to Illumination's lust for celebrity voices. Minions: The Rise of Gru. This movie had a bunch of sweet memes surrounding it. Probably a side effect of releasing a few months after Morbius if you ask me. Anyway, it's a lot better than the first because it has some semblance of a story, and I actually did laugh a handful of times, but it's still just a loud, annoying nothing burger at the end of the day. It also shows that Illumination's been around long enough to utilize nostalgia pandering. Not a good sign. This brings us to where we are now. A lot of these movies are really bad, but my problem with Illumination lies a little deeper than that. In my opinion, Illumination hasn't made a single remotely good movie since Despicable Me 2, nearly a decade ago. And out of their bad movies, the only ones that could even be enjoyed ironically are The Lorax and maybe Rise of Gru. Therefore, 8 out of their 12 products are completely skippable. Looking past enjoyability, what do these movies have to say? The first Despicable Me is still their only movie with a clear theme, about how bonding with others can improve people. The rest either have nothing to say at all, or have the most basic morals told in the most contrived manners possible. They feel less like they tell stories and more like they showcase series of events. The directing of each and every movie is also really flat. They all feel like anyone they could have pulled off the street could have directed them, with their similar styles, tones, and issues. With all this mediocrity in mind, how could such soulless movies make so much money? I have a few theories. First, the marketing. As I've stated before, the marketing for these movies tends to be all over the place. Having such widespread marketing will make more people aware of the movie and in turn draw in more audiences. It feels like they go overboard to try and draw in as many people as possible. Second, celebrity voices. Rather than looking for voice actors with talent, Illumination drags in as many famous people as possible so their fans will see the movie just because their idols' names are on the posters. Some of the celebs do a good job, but others not so much. This also makes it harder for experienced voice actors to find work, since Illumination, among other studios, prefer to hire for fame over talent. And third, parents are just cowards. They don't want to frighten their kids, so they take them to see Illumination's movies in theaters because they know how quote-unquote harmless they are. That's another issue I have involving Illumination. A lot of people defend their movies by going, it's just for kids. You don't hear this flimsy excuse used for the best movies from Disney, Ghibli, DreamWorks, and other studios. You know why? Because most of the time, they are good, well-made movies with artistic merit. They're not strictly for kids. They're for everyone. To quote C.S. Lewis, a children's story that can only be enjoyed by children is not a good children's story in the slightest. If you want to make something for kids, you should make something that'll resonate with them for years on end, that they could even enjoy deep into adulthood. Unfortunately, Illumination refuses to try, because regardless of the product's quality, they'll still make money from it. Taking risks can be scary, but it's how people and studios improve. The most beloved animated movies of all time weren't made by people who chose to play it safe. They had to pour out their hearts and souls to make their movies as great as they could be. But to Illumination, the inoffensive bare minimum is fine enough. It may be bland, but at least they got their money's worth without pissing anyone off. Or so they think. Such low effort being rewarded so heavily sends a clear message to studios. They don't have to try to make good movies to rake in cash. All they really have to do is gather some crowds, regardless of the actual movie's quality. On the other hand, other creators who put passion into their work struggle to be recognized because people would rather go see the bland product purely because it's more well known. If you don't get the memo yet, my problem with Illumination isn't that they make bad, soulless movies. It's that they get rewarded for doing the bare minimum. And since they're still keeping at the streak, it's unlikely that they'll ever try to make a good movie again. But do I think there is any hope for Illumination to improve? As much as I hate to admit it, yes, I do. Their next movie is the Super Mario Bros. Movie. As someone who was very vocally upset with the voice cast when it was first announced, honestly, I'm still a little annoyed with it. It actually looks kinda good, and I'm looking forward to seeing it when it comes out. I'm only holding my breath for it to be good because, well, it's a Mario movie, which Nintendo has been heavily involved with, but it honestly looks like Illumination's actually trying for the first time in forever. Also, they have a brand new IP coming later this year. Whether or not Migration will be any good is entirely up in the air, but I'll take anything new over another sequel, which Illumination is still doing. They also recently hired Netflix's former head of adult animation to produce some more adult-oriented movies in the future. There's a chance they could just be more sausage parties, but if Illumination wants to stop aiming just for the kids, there's a chance that Illumination could get their act together in the coming decade, as small as that chance may be. I mean, if Sony can go from the Emoji Movie to Spider-Verse, anything's possible. Anyway, Illumination, I hope you tone it down with the minions and start making actual movies for once. But for the love of Hylia, don't lay a finger on Zelda. I do not trust you enough to do it justice.